another episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host Avik, and today we are stepping into a fascinating space, or I would say, uh, arena where imagination meets reality. Power of research to infuse the fiction with the truth. Yeah. So, dear listeners, I would love to um, ask you, or maybe I'll tell you, like, think about it. The stories that stay with us the longest, I mean, are often the ones that feel real. And they don't just entertain, they challenge our assumptions, like, open our eyes and make us a question like, what if this really happened? And our guest today is a master of weaving fact and fiction so seamlessly that readers can't tell like where one ends and the other begins. Yep. And I'm really thrilled to introduce you with our lovely guest. Please welcome Guy Morris. So welcome to the show, Guy.
Thank you so much, Avik. It's an honor to be invited.
Amazing guy. So, dear listeners, before we delve deep into the discussion, I'll quickly love to introduce you with Guy. So, um, Guy, after a 38-year career in the leadership across Fortune 500 companies, including the roles at IBM, Oracle, Microsoft, and even pioneering early stage AI in the global energy. So, he turned his brilliant mind to the storytelling. Since 2020, he's released three multiple award winning thrillers inspired by the real technologies, true global politics, history, and the religion. And his books have earned like top industry recognitions and are often compared to the works of Dan Brown, Robert Ludlum, and Irish Johansson. But dear listeners, his life itself reads like a thriller, like escaping an abusive childhood, earning 3 degrees by 25, innovating in economics and technology, writing songs for Disney Records, sailing the seas as a licensed charter captain, and facing death threats in uh, Latin America. Now, so now, through his novels, he uses all those lived experiences and decades of meticulous research to thrill, educate, and inspire. So, dear listeners, I'll not take much of your time. Uh, let's get started. And, Guy, it's really an honor to have you here today. Welcome to the show.
My honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. So, Guy, like many readers, like, don't realize that how much research goes into writing intelligent thrillers. So,
Mm.
from that perspective, I mean, if you say, like, why is research such a critical backbone of your storytelling?
The research is important because we need to get the facts straight.
Mm.
People are if I'm writing a thriller and all of the facts are made up, it's interesting, I suppose, but it doesn't provoke real it doesn't provide real thought-provoking motivation for the reader to contemplate their own life.
Mhm.
It becomes something that we can easily dismiss. One of the reasons I believe books like Jurassic Park um,
Mhm.
had so much resonance with the world is because we realized that we had the technology to do this, and the human cancers of hubris and pride and greed could likely drive us there. And so it's important to understand that we're not just making up science fiction that might happen decades from now, but
Mhm.
scenarios that could happen in our lifetime and within the next few years.
Mhm.
And so there was so much research being done. Most people don't think of AI in this respect. They think of AI as something that's new that's just come up recently. But it's a technology we've actually been working on for almost 70 years.
Mhm.
And through that time, there have been various milestones achieved and big things done and limitations in the way that we had to eliminate and get around. And but we're now finally getting that technology to a point where it can have broad commercial appeal and applications. And it's not the technology itself, although there are things about the technology that we should be concerned with and we should address that most people are completely unaware of because the people who own these technologies don't want to tell you about the things that can go wrong. They want to tell you about how great your life is going to be with their products. And while some of that is also true, we can't discount the negative risks with regard to the technology. But more importantly, and I think this is why one of the reasons I write the books,
Mm,
is I spent my career looking at world economics, world geopolitics, world trade, competitors, long-term strategies to help CEOs and COOs and others, senior executives make better long-term decisions. And as I've applied those skills to the next decade or two, I find several key factors coming to a convergence that could lead to some difficulties for people broadly. And I'm not a pessimist. I'm a pragmatist. I'm a scholar. I'm an academic in that sense. I'm an intellectual. I'm looking at the parameters and the algorithms and the trend lines, and I'm seeing potential conflicts. And so I write books because I'm intentionally wanting to provoke people to think about real issues.
mm,
But to get them to read the books, they also have to be incredibly entertaining. And so you have to be able to combine both to not only keep people engaged, to find out how all of these factors converge together to create the crisis, but help them understand what does this mean to them in their life and what are their options and what are their choices and get them to think about those things in a realistic way. And so we're looking at geopolitical systems. We're looking at national debt crises. We're looking at a rise of fascism and a loss of democracies. We're looking at artificial intelligence that could create misinformation and create greater controls and chaos in our election processes. We're looking at changes to banking and currency systems that could have a real dramatic and personal effect to every individual on the planet. And so we have climate change and all of the war factors that are going on and all of these things that for the average person, we don't have control over. And so, but we still feel the anxiety over these things. Now, you're too young to remember, and perhaps much of your audience is too young,
mm.
but I grew up in the 60s and 70s when the Cold War was raging.
Okay.
And I remember that constant anxiety, the drills to hide under our desk in case there was a nuclear attack, as if that was going to do any good. Um, and even as kids, we were like, "Really, really, is this our strategy? Hide under the desk?" You know, there was a part of me that was like, "Okay, this is kind of ridiculous," but I get the anxiety.
Mm,
And but on the weekend, we would go see a James Bond movie. Now, James Bond had all kinds of other fun gadgets and fun scenes. And for a moment, for that time frame, we could say, okay, we've staved off the disaster to humanity, at least for the end of the movie, and we can go back to our normal lives. And there was a release valve in that turning our anxiety into entertainment and coming up with a positive outcome. And so I think for a sense, there's a part of me that wanted to write books because throughout my career, I've been an eyewitness to many of these convergence systems and issues and trends beginning to happen. And becoming an author was my way to stay relevant and have a voice that hopefully could impact people's lives.
got it. Got it. So, like, I mean, when you are deep into the research, how do you decide, like, what makes it into the story and what gets left behind?
Well, part of what makes it a story, because I'm writing thrillers,
Mm, mhm.
imagine that the first question you always have to ask with a thriller, if once you see if a real scenario is, gee, what can go wrong? You're not going to write thrillers about everybody ending being happy and content and the world being perfect. You're writing thrillers to basically highlight those things that can go wrong that we don't really like to pay attention to. And that's part of our human nature, right? We don't
Mm,
really like to pay attention to the risks or the bad things. We want to live a positive, happy life, and so we focus on those things that are positive. But as a professional who has spent 40 years implementing leading edge technologies, one of the primary skills I developed was what
mm,
we call risk management, right? How to not be afraid of looking at what can go wrong and grappling with that to make sure either it doesn't go wrong or if it does go wrong, I'm prepared. And there's a part of me that's trying to build that into the books. And so the research is part of it is to look at what are the things, what are the weaknesses, where are the cracks that are developing that I can maybe widen a little bit more to let people see them. Where are the convergence of things that say, well, if something goes wrong in this area, that's not going to be existential, but if something goes wrong in five different areas, that could be. And so we're looking at those things that are not only helping educate people into something they don't know, but trying to lay out the scenarios of what could go wrong, and then try to create characters with integrity and courage
yeah.
and maintaining their human qualities. And that's the most important thing about all of these types of topics, which is this is not a technology discussion. This is not a political discussion. It's not an economic or climate discussion. This always has to come back to the humanity, our shared something that we all share, the joys and the pains of it. And that's where we get our real focus. What are the implications of if it goes wrong? What does that mean to us as people? And that's
Yeah.
where you have to use a little bit of imagination. You have to really study history to say, how have people reacted to these kinds of situations before? What are our options? What are the negative consequences of those choices? That's where a thorough understanding of the history of humanity comes into play because at the end of the day, this new technology is just empowering a fundamental nature that existed within our human nature that's always been there. And so we have to look at it not as this is something new, but that this is a technology that's going to empower something old that we keep thinking we've defeated until it comes back. And that
Definitely.
recall of who we were and who we are today and how what we were in the past helped evolve us to who we are today helps us understand why it's important to stand up when we see things going wrong and have a voice and make choices that are healthy not only for our families but for our futures and our future generations. And I think those are really some of the motivations. So when I'm researching, I'm looking for how to make sure I understand what's going on, how to make sure I understand what could go wrong with it, and how to reflect that in the real world
Mm,
systems in a very human way. And of course, along the lines, you're going to discover other pieces of information that go along with that convergence idea. Some of them you want to be exciting I love history and ancient archaeology and ancient architecture and artifacts and all of the religious and the social cultural things that shaped who we are. And so I like to bring in the past into the future. So there's always something from the past that I bring in to kind of give us some context between the past and our present. And there's always something around the humanity and how we're making choices. And part of how we're making choices is that our politics and our economics and other things, and those have an implication as to what our future will look like.
exactly. I mean, that balance is so, I mean, fascinating, like, because uh, uh, too much fact can slow a story down, and
Yes.
uh, but the right detail can definitely electrify it. So that's amazing. And uh, I mean, you were working with AI long before it was kind of everyone's lips.
Yeah.
So, how has your professional background in technology shaped the way you write about AI in the fiction?
Well, there was a couple of events that really shaped my views and started
Mhm.
changing my views. Now, I spent my career I was a very idealistic young man.
Mm,
I embraced technology long before other people did because I
mhm.
saw it as a paradigm shift in human nature. And so I was involved in implementing early stage technologies as far as back as the 70s. And so every major stage, I was either involved in leading an implementation, was experimenting with experimental software techniques, or led whole teams to go out and implement technology.
Yeah.
And so we're always looking at how do we improve the human condition? How do
Mhm.
we improve the way the business runs? How do we improve the way they interact with each other? But there was an event that made me shift my thinking to from what are the benefits to society from these technologies to how could these technologies be used against us? And that came actually in the late 90s. And I discovered
Okay.
at the time, and many of the technologies that we're seeing today have roots that are decades old. Maybe they weren't as sophisticated, maybe they weren't as agile, maybe they weren't as intelligent, but the roots of how that technology worked have existed for a long time.
Mhm.
In the 90s, what caught my attention was I accidentally discovered through a science magazine and an Associated Press article, so it was legitimate, that a program had escaped a government laboratory at at a known NSA spy lab. The
Oh.
article didn't say, and I was stunned at first. I cut the article out, I taped it onto my monitor, and I looked at it every day for probably months. And I kept asking myself, is it a typo? Did they mean to say the program was lost, or the program was stolen, or the program malfunctioned? But the verb that it used was that the program had escaped. So I had to decide in my mind whether that was a typo or a slip. And so I thought, said, well, I know enough. I know a lot of architects. I know how to research technology, architectures and techniques. And so I started trying to figure out how would I design a program that could, what does it mean to escape, by the way? I had to come up with what that meant. And then I said, well, could I actually design a program to do that? Are the technologies in place today, the fundamental basic building core blocks that we were building in the technology fields, do they exist in a way that if I combine them together, I could produce this escape scenario? And once I figured out how that could happen and was feasible, I started turning my attention to say, why would they do that? And that again, that's where James
Mm.
Munn and Q and the whole
Totally.
technology invention of
Mm.
Q, basically taking things and making gadgets and software and everything else. I put my spy hat on and I said, well, okay, well, if I were a spy working for the Q organization in MI6, how would I then use that? Why would I want that technology to function that way? For what purpose? And what other capabilities must this program have had in order to make it worthwhile, to make it invisible and to begin with? And so I did, and I produced a webisode series. It was very popular. We won awards all over the world. I had a friend who was a film producer, lived in LA at the time, and the studios had optioned the idea until two FBI agents showed up at my door.
Right.
They were very they were not in a good mood. They were very concerned with how I figured out how their secret top technology that was missing,
Oh.
worked, and I was over the top obnoxiously giddy. I was
Mm.
like, "Yes, yes, I did it. I figured it out. You wouldn't be here if I was wrong. This is so cool. I'm telling all my friends." And of course, I showed them all my research papers and I showed them the article and I said, "You guys, I didn't hack anything. I didn't steal anything. I just figured it out." And I challenged them. I said, "If I can figure it out, I know somebody else on the other side can figure it out. You should hire me to make sure this doesn't happen again." They did not like that either. So they were not happy with my attitude. They gave me the "we are not amused" speech. I gave them "what are you gonna do about it" shrug. And then my wife came home and gave me the "why are there 2 FBI agents in my dining room" speech. It was the best night ever. But
Okay.
it taught me to rethink about the technology parameters that in technologies that we were building, the capabilities, the potential, the opportunities, the inventiveness of how they can be combined. And it started me thinking in terms of what is the government doing with all this? How will governments react if they had
Mm.
this ability? And knowing that governments are ultimately corrupt on some level,
Yeah.
what are the things that I should be worried about for my family, for
Mm.
my nation, and for the world?
Nice.
And as AI started developing, and there was a couple, and I'm writing a book, I'm going to be releasing a book next year that describes
Mm.
how all of this happened. That as AI started developing these major steps towards the broader capabilities,
Mhm.
um, as I entered retirement, I realized that one of the things that I should be doing, that I needed to do in order to cleanse my conscience, that I spent years helping companies build these things and deploy them and perfect them, but also communicate to the world in a way that normal people would read. If I wrote a white paper on the dangers of artificial intelligence, only other geeks like me would probably read it. But if I can create the Jurassic Park regarding AI, political corruption, and prophecy,
Mhm.
I can get many, many, many times more people engaged in those stories,
Mm.
particularly if they're really, really fun stories with really fun characters that you love to read and you can identify with. And that's why all of my books have been winning awards. It's not the technology research part of it, although they all point out the
Mm.
blend of fact and fiction, but it's how I can make it real towards people feeling about what they're feeling about their humanity.
Wow.
And that becomes the glue to these otherwise geeky topics that nobody really wants to engage with except for other nerds like me. And I needed to expand the language. I needed to get the taxonomies outside of the pure tech issues to the human issues.
True. Definitely. And I mean, I have to say, like, I know the time is constant, but still, one small advice if you would like to share with the listeners today, what that would be.
Say again?
So, I mean, one short advice if you have to give to the listeners, then what that would be.
Oh, one advice. Well, one of the things I think that many people are being faced with that I'm very concerned with is biometric identification and validation, using your thumbprint or your facial recognition to as your password.
Okay.
There's a serious problem with that.
Okay.
In 2021, I think
Mm-hmm.
it was 21, might have been might have been 2020. Um, a company called Clearview, which uses facial recognitions to clear people through security lines at the airport,
Yes.
was hacked. Now, that service was used by not only business executives who traveled a lot, salespeople, but
Mm.
government people as well.
Yeah.
That company was hacked, and all 2.1 million at the time of those
Mm.
spatial identities were sold on the black market. So if you have a password and it's stolen, that is a
Mm.
real pain in the butt. But you
Yes.
can always reset it and start over. You can limit the damage. If your facial recognition is, if your
Mhm.
facial profile, if your identity, your very core of your identity, your thumbprint,
Yep.
your iris, your face, if that's stolen from you,
Mm.
you will never, ever, ever, ever
Yeah.
gain back full control of that identity. So for me, if I tell anybody if there's one thing and only one thing to do, stick with passwords. Don't use biometric identification if at all possible. Now there's some companies such as Microsoft
Mhm.
that are enforcing that and requiring that for corporate identification. This is going to lead to problems. And I can't tell you when and I
Mm.
can't tell you how, but there is an inherent vulnerability with that technology that we're not being informed of properly. So if I had to say one thing, that would be it.
Mm, amazing. That's very important part of it, and the ones you're saying about the facial recognition also. So yes, I have worked with the technology and about that uh, implementing for one of the biggest buildings in Singapore.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, you have everything there in that system. So you do not have that control if it gets hacked, or maybe if you lose control of that. So definitely it will it will be difficult to gain back that access. So definitely.
Yeah. If difficult means impossible, yes,
Yeah.
it's I if my face was sold on the dark web, I don't know who has it.
Mm,
China buys a lot of it, Israel buys a lot of it, Russia buys a lot of it. That's information that I don't want out,
mm,
in public because it could be used against me. Now, because I deal with cybersecurity, because I was visited by the FBI, because I write about things that China's doing and other things, I know that I've been targeted by the FBI, China, and other people, and so
mm,
I'm extra cautious,
yeah,
about anything that might, potentially be a theft of my identity or something that isn't seem right.
exactly.
Not but most people are not as paranoid as I am because they're not as educated as I am about what could go wrong. Um, and so part of the books is to I don't want to
Mm,
insert fear into everyone, raw fear, because the characters overcome. The
yeah,
characters find ways to say, well, if this is happening over here, we can avoid it by going
mm,
over there. There's
exactly.
ways of going around it. And another thing that I think that's important for the readers, for the listeners to know, I believe in characters who are nonviolent.
Mm,
My main protagonists are an AI and who has been trained that taking life is not something we ever really want to do. And by but my and he's that AI has been trained by my main protagonist who doesn't believe that that he should ever have to kill anybody for any reason.
mm,
And even if he can escape, he should do so by being smarter, by being
yeah,
faster, by deception, by, it's okay to maim, it's okay to stop, it's okay to, it's okay to hurt somebody enough to escape, but death is permanent and he doesn't feel that it's he suffered from a trauma as a child of seeing his
mm,
parents killed. And so he has this
exactly.
natural aversion towards
Mm,
violence. And
exactly.
so while there is some action scenes in the movie, and some people do get hurt in the movie, or in the
Mhm,
books rather, there's a philosophy that I'm trying to also implement, which is we don't, sometimes people who are violent are going to die of we've heard the old saying, um, live by the sword, die by the sword. And so
mm,
we let those who live by the sword die in the books, but
mm,
we try to make sure that they're doing it by their own mistakes in their own hands or by accidents or things that happen. We never allow the protagonist to be the person who decides it's my job to live and your job.
exactly.
And so that's important because we're all facing a very volatile future right now.
Yeah.
And there will human nature tells us there
Mm,
will be violence. We're seeing political violence here in the United States. I
yeah.
find it disgusting. But what I find more disgusting is is using it to create political fervor and hate and anxiety and building it up.
Agree.
And it's a tragedy. And when we use it for malicious
Mm,
purposes, it makes it even worse. So there's a lot of moral issues that I'm trying to bring up. I'm trying to write books that are so fun to read, so
mm,
engaging that you really have a hard time putting them down, but they're so thought-provoking in the real issues that I want my readers to think about. They have a hard time not thinking about them for weeks
mm.
afterwards. And
No,
so
totally agree.
that's a high bar. So I intentionally put myself under that stress every single book. And my wife thinks I'm a little crazy. If I could just write romance novels, I'd sell a lot more books. I would live with a lot less stress.
Yeah.
Um, I just don't think I'm called to do that. So
No, that's totally fine, and I totally can understand. And um, yeah, so with this hope, dear listeners, like um, today's conversation is kind of incredible, I say. And uh, for everyone who is listening, like, here's the key takeaway: that stories rooted in the truth don't just entertain, they invite us to think,
Yes.
question, and imagine new possibilities. And
And hopefully help us change as individuals,
exactly,
right? These are the
exactly,
things that we need to be able to change our own thinking and change our own hearts. And
different.
that ultimately is the goal.
Exactly. So, dear listeners, so what I'll do is I'll put all the details and the links into the show notes for your easy reference. And with this hope, until next time, this is your host, Avik. So, stay curious, stay inspired, and as always, keep your mind and your life healthy. So, thank you so much.